Can a presidential administration speed up God's prophetic calendar? We'll talk about that this hour.
See, here's the key. Once again, Genesis to Revelation. You can't take out prophecy, because if you do, you don't understand the biblical significance of the days we live in.
Welcome to Understanding the Times Radio with Jan Markell, Radio for the Remnant, brought to you by Olive Tree Ministries. Today, Jan spends the hour with Bill Koenig, a news journalist who has covered 3 White House administrations over 20 years. Presidential actions really do have consequences, and that has transpired in all administrations, and particularly when they hold to godless principles. Also joining Jan is Pastor Mark Henry, co-host of our bi-monthly Understanding the Times conferences in Minneapolis. Bill, Mark, and Jan also consider some of the current financial trends that are changing the way you live. Now here is today's programming.
When I see these events happen over and over again, when I saw them happen for Bush, Clinton, and Bush, and Obama, and now Trump, I go, this just continues to confirm over and over again that you touch that land, let me put it this way, the greater the pressure on Israel to divide their covenant land, the greater the corresponding catastrophe in America. And Gary, I've even seen hurricanes, Hurricane Earl in 2010, go back to the ocean when Clinton and Obama said we will not pressure Israel to make peace with the Palestinians or vice versa. It was a Category 5, became a 2 and went back to the ocean. Or when President George Bush was with Ariel Sharon at the UN in September 2005 when he said, we will not pressure Israel to do what they don't want to do.
Wow.
Ophelia, that was about to hit the Outer Banks of North Carolina, dissipated and went back to the ocean. That's why I say the greater the pressure on Israel, the greater the corresponding catastrophe. When I see Israel's land being the focus of the leaders of the nations, you can feel this collective fury and see this atmospheric reaction. It's a mystery, but at the same time you see this, it's like the collective fury or the fire, the wrath of the God of Israel. So that's my land. I do not intend for Judea, Samaria, the biblical heartland of Israel, or the city of Jerusalem to be an Arab state.
Welcome to the program. I'm so glad you can join me for the hour. I'm spending the hour with the familiar voice of Bill Koenig, whom many of you know from many sources, actually. His web outreach will give that info, his books, my conferences as a guest on this radio program. I began working with Bill in 2002. He's been at 6 of my conferences here in the Twin City area and will be with us next Thursday, May 11th, at our spring Understanding the Times here in the Minneapolis area. And we will live stream this to the world. We'll say more about that later. These are our bi-monthly meetings in conjunction with Pastor Mark Henry here in suburban Minneapolis. Pastor Mark Henry also in studio with me. Gentlemen, welcome both to the program. Thank you, Mark, for coming in.
Glad to be with you, Jan.
Bill, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Jan.
Bill, you have been reporting on things in Washington for over 20 years. You were a White House correspondent there for years. You continue to be doing electronic newsletters and speaking about the situation in our nation's capital. And my observation is, certainly in recent years and even decades, those in power care about only that power and financial gain. Tell me how things have changed, and I mean kind of in a paragraph or two, how things have changed over the time that you have been observing and writing about these things.
Starting in 2001, being at the White House in the beginning of George W. Bush's term, I was so surprised at the level of vitriol and hatred of the leftist media, which was the majority of the people in that press room, towards Republicans, towards conservatives. Ronald Reagan had a lot of challenges with the media. George Herbert Walker Bush did. And then to watch on a daily basis, they were constantly after Bush. At that time, we were involved in Iraqi freedom toward the end of 2001, and it just continued like that. After 9/11, and then the Iraqi war, and then up to Katrina. He was always being questioned, and the whole mindset was, we don't like conservatives. And then Obama came into office. The media became more and more, obviously, they could do whatever they wanted to do there with Obama because he was their guy. He was a leftist. He was the guy that was in favor of same-sex marriage. He was the guy that posted on the day that he was inaugurated the LGBT agenda. He was the guy that spoke of racism in America. He was the perfect guy. Majority of the White House media, this was their guy. And then Trump came on, and Trump took him on. They didn't like that. Sarah Huckabee Sanders and other White House press secretaries had their hands full. But I think also, Jan, you and I have talked about this before, the level of influence of Twitter and the social networks, Facebook, TikTok, have had a dramatic impact on the animosity, the vitriol, and the dislike of conservatives. And they use those tools. The Democratic Party and their powers to be use those social networks to intimidate almost anybody that opposes their way of thinking.
So you have been chronicling between your website, your books, your speaking engagements, etc., how prophetic events have unfolded, certainly since your time there, which obviously is now over 20 years. How do you see the Biden administration furthering God's prophetic calendar?
Number one, getting out of Afghanistan the way we did was a disaster. And leaving that Bagram Air Force Base to a future Chinese base, we had $50 or $60 billion in equipment at that base. The embarrassment of the way that we left. I remember when Obama was in office, the allies didn't trust him and the enemies didn't fear him. What we're seeing in the Middle East is a continuation of the Obama Middle East plan, favorability toward Iran, at times coming across weak, trying to force the Saudis to produce more oil, which was a joke when we have a phenomenal amount of oil and gas in the United States. So I think just his posturing, the empowering of Iran, Obama did, attempting to do that again, outside the fact that he and his administration are not the type to do anything. With Secretary Austin, General Milley, and others, they're worried more about the woke and LGBT and those kind of things. And also, I'll make this a quick note, I think the situation with the United States and NATO against Russia and the Ukraine has brought Iran and Russia closer together than ever before. Also, an isolation of Israel by both Russia and the Ukraine. Ukraine wants help, Russia doesn't. And then also the situation with Taiwan, the role there, and also the compromise of the Bidens with the Chinese. Yes. So these are final day markers that are being accelerated by the Biden administration.
Yeah, and Jen, as I think about that question, how is this tying into prophecy? Back in the 80s when I trusted Christ as my Savior, I'm reading through the scriptures, and I didn't find America as the world superpower. We find this revised Roman Empire, we find the Antichrist during the time of the tribulation, and all of this unfolding, of course, after the rapture of the church. And so I remember asking people, it's like, well, if America's not the superpower, I mean, how does this take place? And it was incomprehensible how America could be removed. And I remember even I was in high school. I said, that's impossible. The American dollar, the American economy is too strong. There's no way these other countries could lead the world. Here we are seeing the collapse of the American economy, American leadership. Literally on every front, we are being reduced to a middle power and mocked on every side. And we're seeing this unfold right before our eyes. So is President Biden involved in this? Absolutely. Whether he knows it or not, and I'm a patriot, I'm for America. America's a land of people and an idea that all men are created by God and equal. Those are under attack, but this is part of the unfolding of the last days, and we're seeing it right before our eyes.
It really is. So, Bill, about a week ago, Joe Biden actually stated that he is going to run for president in 2024. Sorry, that does seem unthinkable. Do you have any idea, and you and I have talked privately about this, and I know you feel that he may be nominated, but it's not going to go very far. I think you even feel that Gavin Newsom will be stuck in there as a candidate. Just give me your thoughts on that.
I think a lot of people, including myself, are surprised that Biden has got through 2.5 years.
Yeah, exactly.
It's obviously diminishing cognitively, and some of the gaffes he does on a weekly basis have been very problematic. I know some of the key people that have been in his administration, for the most part, whether Obama was outside administration, Susan Rice, Ron Klain, and others have been calling a lot of the shots. So one other quick note here, as far as Biden's prophetic final day role, is what you covered so well with a lot of your guests, the World Economic Forum, the digital currency, the digital passports, the program you just had with Michelle about the World Health Organization, trying to get the United States part of, or being obligated to the World Health Organization. So right now he's serving a purpose for the globalists, the guys that want to be in complete control of everything. So I think, with a long answer to your question, Jan, I don't see how he's going to make it physically and mentally. And I think that we're going to continue to see it diminish. I think at this point, Gavin Newsom's probably best known guy within the Democratic Party. And very likely he could be a formidable candidate unless somebody comes up, a governor or somebody like that. I think we have a lot of surprises ahead of us between now and 2024.
Mark Henry, I don't think we've lived at a time when the prophetic events that have been referred to here, and there have been half a dozen of them, quite frankly, there are probably dozens and dozens, have been unfolding at the rapid pace that we see now.
No, and it's interesting, when you read Daniel chapter 9, and it talks there, Daniel, seal up the things that he's talking about. And he says, but they're going to be revealed. They're going to be understood when two things happen, when people travel to and fro throughout the whole earth. And then secondly, knowledge increases. And you think about those two things in light of human history. My grandmother used to go to church in a buggy. My great-grandmother, she raised me. And she would talk about they'd have to get the horses and they'd have to hook up the buggy. So if you go back through human history, all through human history, as fast as a horse could go, that was the speed of man. But now, and you think about knowledge increasing, AI technology, the compounding of that. And so we're seeing these things happen at a very rapid pace. We shouldn't be surprised. It should move everyone's heart to believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and seek him these days.
If you just joined me, you're listening to Understanding the Times Radio. I'm Jan Markell. Have in the studio with me Pastor Mark Henry, Revived Church, Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. He co-hosts the bi-monthly Understanding the Times events here in the Twin Cities, and you can always watch them live or post-program, either markhenryministries.com to watch it live. Bill will be with us on Thursday, May 11th, 7 to 9 p.m. Central Time, always Central Time. Doors open at the church at 6 p.m., and that's Revived Church, 7849 West Broadway, Brooklyn Park. Plenty of seating, but you might want to get it on your calendar quickly because it's coming up here. You can also use the Mark Henry Ministries app, Olive Tree Ministries app, and view the events post-program, olivetreeviews.org, markhenryministries.com. And by the way, Michelle Bachman will be a part of the program that evening as well, participating in the panel discussion and the Q&A. So Bill Koenig and Michelle Bachman. Bill, I want to play a soundbite. It's of you. And I think the thing that has made an impression on so many people over the 20 to 30 years that you've been speaking out as you have, has been how you have documented so carefully, not just a dozen events, but hundreds, the consequences that happen to America when we start putting pressure on God's land. I'm going to play a real short clip here, and it is you talking about this, and you go back to 1991 and George Herbert Walker Bush.
Genesis 15:18, God spoke of the boundaries of his covenant land, the Abrahamic covenant. It's Genesis 15:18. It goes from the Euphrates River to the great river in Egypt. Israel's never fully occupied that land, but I can tell you that is God's covenant land. He did not establish that land to be an Arab state. He did not plan for an Arab state to occupy Judea and Samaria, or a capital to be in East Jerusalem. This is God's covenant land. God blessed the Arab people with lots of land and lots of people, and they have their land. But this land is covenant land. This is God's land. And I determined when we attempted to put pressure on Israel to divide their land, we would have enormous atmospheric reactions within the United States. Perfect storm, the first one, the perfect storm in 1991. President George Herbert Walker Bush is in Madrid, Spain, calling on Israel to give back the land that they obtained in the war of self-defense, the 6-day war. And as he's calling on Israel to give up this land, Judea, Samaria, East Jerusalem, 30-foot waves are crashing into his home in Kennebunkport, Maine at the very moment he was speaking. Not a day later, a week later, a month later. And at that point, President Bush had the highest approval rating in history at 91% after the successful Desert Storm. And from that point, after the Madrid conference, it was one problem after another, one gaffe after another. He lost his campaign manager. Ross Perot was in and out of that election, only to be defeated by Bill Clinton in that upcoming election, 92. Unbelievable. And many other events. There's 126 events in eye to eye. Record-setting catastrophes. And I noticed the greater pressure we put on Israel to divide their land, the greater the corresponding catastrophe. In other words, happening at the same time. And every president that's attempted, well-meaning, hoping that Israel would live in peace, but every president went along with giving up that land for a future Arab state or a future state, there were consequences.
If you'd like to actually read the book that Bill is referring to, Eye to Eye, Facing the Consequences of Dividing Israel, it is a wonderful and a fascinating book. Find that at his website, watch.org, watch as in watchman. And the other book he's written is Revealed, Obama's Legacy. Bill, is the pattern continuing even as we speak?
Absolutely, Jan. It happened in Texas during the major freeze in
Yes.
February of 2021. There was 4 things the Biden administration did in about 72 hours. And that polar vortex came and hit Texas like, man, unbelievable. The way it hit, the disruption it caused. Another major event happened when he had Prime Minister Bennett in the White House. He was putting pressure on him to go forward with the peace process. We had another record-setting weather-related event happen at the very moment that he was in the White House with Prime Minister Bennett from Israel. And then last summer, Ian, that was a massive, going to be the second or third biggest event in U.S. history that was taking place as Biden's at the UN calling for Israel to go forward and take the peace process as serious. They had forced Lapid from the interim Prime Minister UN to talk about his favorability of starting a peace conference. Ian came ashore shortly thereafter. That was an incredibly costly event. You see these events, and it's hard sometimes, especially for the people that live through these hardships. But I've documented over and over again 126 events in Eye to Eye, plus we've added another 14 that took place during President Trump's time in office, as well as 4 or 5 that have happened since Biden took office. And what's interesting now, we've had tornado outbreaks recently.
Yes.
From my history, the major hurricanes happened during the Bush and Trump terms, and major record-setting tornadoes took place during Obama's time in office and now Biden's time in office.
Mark Henry, from your position as a pastor, do you feel that the sheep, I'm not referring necessarily to everyone in your congregation, but in general within the corporate church, even understand some of the concepts we're talking about here?
No, and it's really sad. Genesis 12:3 says, Abraham, I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you. And you read all through the Bible, Jan, every time somebody is attacking God's covenant people, the Jewish people, there's always massive consequences. Then by the time they enter into the land, there's these consequences that come. In fact, God, even in Joel 3, talking about the future when he brings all the nations of the world against Israel in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, and he judges them, it talks about how they scattered Israel, and that's why he judges them, and why they divided up his land. What you do to Israel really matters. We see it everywhere in the Bible. We see it over and over and over again, which shouldn't be missed. And I think there's another element, Jan, and that's this. God is no respecter of persons. It doesn't matter if you're president of the United States or some obscure person. It doesn't matter if you're from this party or that party. When you go against Israel, there's going to be consequences. Jan, I wish the president would stand up and say, you know, all of the Arab nations own a lot of property.
Yeah.
And God said from the great river Euphrates down to the great river of Egypt should be Israel's.
That's right.
So let's talk about a peace plan where you guys give up some property and give them that.
Mark, before we even take a midpoint break here, we need to have you talk about, and again, now we're back to referring to what's coming up on May 11th. At your church here in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, northwest suburb of Minneapolis, the Pastor's Huddle. What is it? Why are you even pursuing a Pastor's Huddle?
Jen, one of the things you and I have often talked about is how we need to strengthen the church and help people understand the great truths and realities that God has a plan for Israel. He has a plan for ethnic Israel. He's got a plan for the church. And at the end of the time of the Gentiles, which we're currently living in, there's going to be this rapture, and God's wrath is going to fall upon the world and is going to bring Israel to a place of repentance. And we're going to see this great revival. All of Israel will be saved at the end of the tribulation period. We need to be sharing these things. And so just as you and I were talking, I was so blessed as you and I just started brainstorming and thinking about how we can strengthen pastors along these lines. So we started the Pastor's Huddle. The first one's going to be this May. It's going to be 3 days. Pastors come in. We've got a good friend of mine, Dr. Michael Powell. He's a longtime servant of the Lord, graduate of Dallas Seminary from the old days, from Dr. Pentecost and Ryrie and Woolvard generation. That's who he was trained under. He's just a great servant of God. He's helped me understand the scriptures. We're going to be talking about a dispensational hermeneutic as it applies to Daniel and Revelation, and that's what pastors need to understand.
That's May 10th, 11th, 12th coming up. It's in conjunction with our meeting here with Bill Koenig, and I think it may be getting close to almost being filled up, but we're looking towards October as well.
Yeah, so we're going to have a number of these. This first one is in May, and then the next one is in October. And I want to encourage you pastors, listen, you need to spend time with really godly men who have pastored a long time, who have studied theology. We want to look at the complexities because, quite honestly, most pastors are being trained from a preterist perspective, from a replacement theology perspective. And guys, we need to spend some time with some really godly men, sort these things out, and preach the scriptures in their entirety.
Bill Koenig, one of your burdens, and mine, and for that matter, Mark's as well, is the fact that there are at least 100 million, let's keep it to America, 100 million Americans attending replacement theology churches. Mark and I have talked about that on air before and at our conferences before. Let's hear it from your perspective. Why is this almost a catastrophe?
Well, in 2004, the Lord put in my heart to look at all the major churches in America and add up the total. And at that time, Jan, it was 100 million American church attendees that went to replacement theology churches. It's probably somewhere in that area today, maybe a little bit less. But the bottom line here is we have a majority, about 65% of our church in America, that has no understanding of the biblical significance of the state of Israel, no idea that God is going to judge the world. They have no idea of Christ having a millennial reign. And most important for us as evangelicals, and even thought of a rapture. They have no idea or understanding of a rapture. So these four things, most of the people that are in church in America have no idea or understanding. And again, the biblical significance of God's time clock, which is Jerusalem, the state of Israel.
Mm-hmm. This is a tragedy of our lifetime. I concur, Bill, and I have ministered in some of the denominations represented in your list there. And there are some wonderful people in some of these churches. They have no idea what they're missing out on. They have no idea that not being able to understand God's plan for the ages using the Jewish people is sort of the center of our faith, which sadly there are too few denominations even touching on.
Absolutely. But I think there's going to be an opportunity, Jen. I think more and more are saying, do you know about the apocalypse? And it's giving us opportunities, Jen, and programs like yours and the work that Mark's doing with pastors and others like the work that we do is pointing people to the biblical significance of the scriptures. I remember I had some Orthodox Jews that were Torah observers. They were correspondents of the White House. And anytime something would happen in Israel, the Middle East, they'd come to me and go, where's that in the Tanakh or the Old Testament? I said, well, look at Daniel 9:27. Look at Zechariah 12. Look at Isaiah 63. And I'd start giving them a lesson on prophecy. Again, 27% of our Bible is Bible prophecy. It's as relevant today as it's ever been, and we are a blessed generation that very likely is going to see our Lord's return to a nation called Israel, the New Jerusalem. So it's an opportunity for us to be there, to share, and at some point, I think when times get even more challenging, people are going to want to have a more biblical perspective, something that a lot of people don't even have.
I wish that time would hurry up. You're right. I can't keep up with everything that's happening. Mark, and I know you refer to things from the pulpit all the time. I'm sure you have trouble keeping up and inserting everything into the messages that you give or programming like this because it's breaking so fast. Never like this in my lifetime.
Hal Lindsey once said that he used to read the newspaper every day and was hoping to find something that would connect to prophecy. And if he found one, he just said he was so excited. I found something that I can use in my program or whatever. And today, it's like, Jan, which one do we pick from? Or you take a newspaper, fold it up, and throw a dart, and you got three of them.
Bill, let me hit one more topic before I take my midpoint break here. But we have a former U.S. president under fire. They're trying to indict Donald Trump, although they never seem to arrest or indict anyone on the left for similar concerns. Where do you see this going?
Jan, when you think about it, look what Trump has been under. The attack he's been under since the day that he declared his desire to be the nominee of the Republican Party in 2015. It's unbelievable what he has been through. And at times that we talk, he doesn't help himself.
Right, he doesn't.
For the most part, this is absolutely absurd. The Russian hoax, the ridiculous correspondence you have with the president of the Ukraine, and the amount of money that's been spent by the Democratic Party and Congress trying to find something, his nonprofits in New York, his financial records, it is unbelievable what they have put him through. And now he's going through this case. They're trying to embarrass him in New York. Alan Dershowitz and other attorneys have said, there's no grounds here. This is ridiculous. And he'll probably be found guilty, then he'll appeal it. I think the case is going to court in December. It's unbelievable. Jan, never, ever have we seen attack on an individual like President Trump. I tell you what, he accomplished a lot being under constant daily pressure. But I think in many ways, history will treat him like a Ronald Reagan. I mean, he did a lot of remarkable things. Just think what our country would be like today without the 200 judges that he was able to put on the bench. Look what happened in the Middle East. No wars, took down Soleimani of Iran, al-Baghdadi, ISIS, and he did more for Israel than all previous presidents combined. He's a threat, but I tell you what, his base is loyal, and in the polls, he is at this point likely going to be the nominee of the Republican Party again in 2024.
I encourage you to sign up for Bill Koenig's weekly e-newsletter. That's Koenig's Eye View from the White House, and you can sign up for it at his website, watch.org, watch as in watchman, watch.org. And again, find his books posted there, Eye to Eye, Facing the Consequences of Dividing Israel, and Revealed, Obama's Legacy. I have in studio with me Pastor Mark Henry. You can reach him at markhenryministries.com, markhenryministries.com. He pastors Revive Church in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, northwest suburb of Minneapolis, revivebrooklynpark.org, revivebrooklynpark.org. We carry his book, which is titled The Man Code, 12 Essentials Every Man Needs to Know. You can find it in my online bookstore, olivetreeviews.org, olivetreeviews.org. And Pastor Mark, your services at Revive Church in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, the times would be?
Saturday at 4 p.m. and then Sunday morning we have a 8 and a 9:30 and 11 o'clock, and the Lord's really blessing. We're really excited.
Fantastic music if you like traditional music. Sunday, 8 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. And your Saturday and Sunday at 11 a.m. be more contemporary, correct?
That's right.
We're going to come back. I've got a lot more questions and issues to talk to with Bill Koenig and Pastor Mark Henry. And we'll do that in just a moment or two, so don't go away. I'm coming right back.
We hope you'll stay in touch with us online through olivetreeviews.org. That's olivetreeviews.org. You can call us Central Time at 763-559-4444. That is 763-559-4444. Write us through the mail at Olive Tree Ministries in Jan Markell, Post Office Box 1452, Maple Grove, Minnesota 55311. That's Post Office Box 1452, Maple Grove, Minnesota 55311. All gifts are tax deductible. In this age of uncertainty corrupted by sin and greed, where truth cannot be found, thank you for trusting Understanding the Times Radio and Olive Tree Ministries. We are so pleased to introduce the latest book by author and teacher Amir Sarfati. The book is Has the Tribulation Begun? Avoiding Confusion and Redeeming the Time in These Last Days. The book looks at the signs of the times compared to global events today, but it also offers hope and enables us to persevere in today's temporal world. The book comes with an optional workbook for individual or group study. This is a book for such a time as this, as we watch world events line up with the Bible. Find it in our online store at olivetreeviews.org. That's olivetreeviews.org. Call us Monday through Friday Central Standard Time at 763-559-4444. That is 763-559-4444. Or sign up for our newsletters that offer products. That's Has the Tribulation Begun? Avoiding Confusion and Redeeming the Time in These Last Days by Israeli author Amir Sarfati. It will truly be a tool to help you better understand the times and be a watchman on the wall.
Keep our eyes on the Lord, which will help us through these times, and at the same time, look with that blessed hope of Christ's return. Not sure when it's going to be. We certainly think it's going to be soon, but just remember God's plan for our lives, God's plan for our future, and get excited and expectant of His return.
We know you can't always be by a radio, so if you miss a program visit our website, olivetreeviews.org. That's olivetreeviews.org. And then go to radio, where we feature both the audio and video version of our program. You can also catch the program at oneplace.com, on our Rumble or YouTube channel, and on his channel, Christian TV. Now, here are Jan Markell, Bill Koenig, and Pastor Mark Henry to wrap up today's programming.
FDR had in many ways, a problematic relationship with the Jewish people. There's a lot of Jewish Americans today, and even Jewish Israelis, that were furious at FDR for turning away Jews that wanted to leave Europe and come to the United States during the Holocaust. And as I mentioned, that letter that he had with Saudi Arabia was to appease them. The king of Saudi Arabia, King Saud, had gone back and forth with his concerns with FDR about Israel becoming a state. And then to be replaced 7 days later, supernaturally, the way I look at it, replaced by a man, Harry Truman, who history says by the age of 12, he had read through the Bible twice. He had a Baptist background. His mother was a very strong believer. His State Department overwhelmingly opposed a state of Israel, a Jewish state in the middle of the Middle East. And he, through his courage and his biblical and family understanding, and his close friend, Eddie Jacobson, a former business partner, a Jewish man who was very strong in the importance of Israel becoming a state, had an influence on this very key decision. And on May 14, 1948, Israel became a state, fulfilling Bible prophecy.
And welcome back. You're listening to Understanding the Times Radio. That was the voice of Bill Koenig, and you've heard him on this program probably a couple dozen times or at my conferences. Learn more at his website, watch.org. My in-studio guest, Pastor Mark Henry. Learn more at markhenryministries.com. Bill will be with us on Thursday, May 11th at 7 p.m. Central Time. Revive Church, Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, live streamed to the world. markhenryministries.com. You can watch it live there. Mark's app, Olive Tree Ministries app. You can find it on our website's post-program. No cost, lots of seating, first come, first served. Again, that's 7849 West Broadway in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, 7 to 9 p.m. Central Time. Doors open at 6 p.m. And by the way, Michelle Bachman will be a part of the program that evening as well, participating in the panel discussion and the Q&A. So Bill Koenig and Michelle Bachman. Bill Koenig, I want to get back to discussion with you here quickly, and that would be, we talked about the favor President Donald Trump showed on Israel, moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, etc. He did so many things, it'd take us about 10 minutes to list them all. You feel he made a major mistake. And I think that would be January 28th, 2020, when life as we know it changed, certainly in the Western world. Talk to me about that.
President Trump was such a great friend of Israel, as previous presidents Clinton and Bush and Obama had promised to do during campaigns to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Trump did it. But on January 28, 2020, through the efforts of his son-in-law Kushner, he introduced the Peace to Prosperity Plan at the White House. Michelle Bachman was there, myself and others, the media and past president and other government officials. Netanyahu was there, people from Israel were there, and Trump gave his plan that also had a map. What was interesting is right after he presented his map that went on Twitter, we had a 7.7 earthquake shake the Miami financial district. What was interesting about that earthquake, usually they come in hot and then they drop to a lower size. That came in a 7.3, and rather than dropping into the sixes, it was bumped to 7.7. I thought, oh, thank you, Lord. Literally 42 minutes after Trump's map that superimposed the map of Genesis 15:18 was presented. Also, later that afternoon, Peter Navarro, a White House advisor, was telling President Trump previously, but especially that afternoon, was telling Fauci and Azar, the health secretary, and Mulvaney, the chief of staff, we've got a huge problem. It's called coronavirus. We need to start shutting down air travel to China. They kind of laughed him off. So Navarro was furious. So the next day, January 29, the day after the peace plan, the Trump-Kushner plan was introduced at the White House, at Netanyahu back, Navarro said we're going to lose 1 million people It's going to cost us $3 trillion unless you do something immediately, develop a task force. I also wrote a commentary, Jan, life in America before January 28, when there was great favor on President Trump and our country, to life after January 28, when the coronavirus COVID crisis hit the United States and the world, and also hit those countries that opposed the Trump plan but have favored their two-state plan. It is a distinctive difference in life in America starting with January 28, 2020.
And you feel this is a direct consequence because of the action that would disfavor Israel. In other words, some of the territory that does belong to Israel in the Peace to Prosperity Plan, and again in the Abraham Accords that would come up a little bit later, some of that land could be in the future sacrificed for either Palestinian lands or even a Palestinian state.
Absolutely. The plan called for 70-80% to be set aside for a Palestinian state. Ambassador Friedman had told some audiences, well, we never really expected the Palestinians to fulfill their obligations. And at the Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast in Houston in February, I talked to former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. I said, Mark, there was a distinctive difference when that plan was delivered. He said, well, we never thought they would accept it anyway. I said, Mark, it doesn't matter. They continued the two-state narrative. You talked about a future Palestinian state in 70 to 80% of Judea and Samaria, and it talked about a future capital in East Jerusalem. So I don't care whether you guys meant it or not, life for the Trump administration changed dramatically on January 28th, led to a COVID crisis, but led to vote by mail, the outcome that many of us were concerned about.
Right. Your thoughts, Mark?
Jan, it just shows that God is no respecter of persons again. Here, the president who had moved, and I remember going to Israel for the first time, and you'd go into Tel Aviv and we'd see the U.S. Embassy, and our Jewish friends would always say, our guides, and they would say, oh, if we could just move that to Jerusalem. And he does that. And, he does so many wonderful things for Israel. And then he presents this two-state plan, and that's a demise. And God's no respecter of persons.
Bill, where do you see things moving here ahead in the next year about the issues that we're talking about? Obviously, we have an election coming up in 2024, and that could change the face of everything. And I don't know if you have any insight on that. We already talked about that first half of the program where I know you feel that Mr. Biden is not going to be running on a second term, even though he has now officially announced that he will be running. If he did run and win, end of his second term, he'd be 86 years old. That's a little bit daunting. Where do you think this is all headed?
A couple things, Jan, as we summarize what's happening with the Biden administration in the Middle East. China's making a move. They just worked out an arrangement between Iran and Saudi Arabia to amend their differences. China's become a bigger player. Russia's also a distinctive player. The United States seems to want to bail out, just like Obama did. Biden seems to do the same. Another big concern right now, the typical support that AIPAC, the big lobby group that supports the Jewish cause in Israel, who had great bipartisan influence, the Democrats, more and more of them, are kind of moving away from Israel and their support of Israel, which is very concerning and problematic. At the same time, the support by the Republican Party for Israel and the country of Israel is stronger than ever and continues to get stronger. Israel's going to have to make a decision on what to do with Iran. They're developing sophisticated missiles right now that will be deployed in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and also Yemen. That's a big concern. There's 150,000 rockets on Israel's northern border right now. And I think, Jan, the last time I heard a couple months ago, there's 15,000 Iranian missiles now pointed at Israel from Syria and Lebanon. There's going to be a tough decision to be made. I think part of the reason Netanyahu's the prime minister in Israel is a majority, 75-80% of Israel, wants him to be the prime minister at the time of conflict with Iran. He's been so eloquent over the years talking about the Iranian threat. So I think between now and the 2024 election, there's going to be some tough decisions made by our administration, but especially in Israel, on what to do with the Iranian threat. One other thing I noted in the first half hour is because of the Ukraine-Russian conflict, Iran is helping with drones, and their defense and military and political relationship has improved dramatically because of the Ukraine war. We continue to watch Turkey, Erdogan, Iran, and Russia as they move toward their Ezekiel 37-38 position in the Gog-Magog conflict.
Bill, what do you see as the red line for Israel acting? I'm shocked that they've waited this long.
Yeah.
Is it the current division within the state? I mean, help me figure that out.
2016, According to previous U.S. ambassadors from Iraq and Syria, Jeffers and Crocker, they were concerned that Israel was very close to striking because at that time there were Syrian, Iranians, and Russians just above the Golan Heights inside of Syria. So it was very close to something happening that summer. Then everything calmed down a bit and then moved into the 2016 election. The problem in 2016, Netanyahu could not get the support from his defense industry, his defense minister, and then Gantz and others and previous defense ministers have opposed a unilateral preemptive strike by Israel on Iran. So I don't quite know where it is right now. I know there was a plan in 2012 that Netanyahu had that Obama said, hey, don't do it. It was pretty decisive. Hydrogen bombs, nuclear bombs, EMP, etc. So I'm throwing a lot of content in there that Israel has had a plan. The good news is now I think they have 30 or 35 stealth bombers that have been provided by the United States, which helps them dramatically. Long answer to your question, Mark, but I know we're getting much, much closer, and Iran just seems bent on, determined to attempt to wipe out this Jewish state.
They will be very unsuccessful. We do know that. He that keeps Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. You are listening to Understanding the Times Radio. Jan Markell. Have in studio Pastor Mark Henry from Revived Church, Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, where we hold our bi-monthly Understanding the Times prophecy and current event happenings. Lots of people have been watching online. We appreciate that. I'm sure way over 1 million at this point. I'm just transitioning for a moment. I got an email. I'm just going to read 2 lines of the email because I kind of like to talk about the financial situation for at least a minute or two here. I'm keeping this person anonymous. She says, my question is, with all the talk about digital money and digital passport, are we as Christians to be okay with utilizing digital money, digital passport? Isn't it the beginning of the beast system? Are we to, in other words, tap into it and just trust God, or forego taking a part of this new money digital system? Let me just comment here. We won't have any option. If we're still here when this is implemented, we have no option but to tap into this because cash will be gone. And then, Bill, you were telling me a little bit about how the new marker will be QR codes. We talked about that for a short time. Everything will be totally digital. Let me play just a real short clip here of a discussion on the coming economy. Both of you gentlemen are so gifted when it comes to money issues. This is Tucker Carlson and an economist by the name of Stephanie Pompey. By the way, my concern is that Tucker's leaving of Fox, which is now some 10 days ago, is a fatal blow to Fox News. And as Bill said to me privately, we need to start boycotting Fox for some other options, Newsmax and other options out there. But this is Tucker. This would have been a few months ago. And an economist. In other words, are we heading to another crisis like 2008? I don't know that we know that answer. I think the possibility of that happening is very, very high.
Stephanie Pompey is an economist. She founded Macro Mavens, where she is the CEO. She joins us tonight. Stephanie, thanks so much for coming on. So can you just give us your coolest, most attached assessment of what we're seeing? This seems like a big deal, is it?
I can't believe that you're not allayed by listening to Treasury Secretary Yellen. I mean, clearly she's got the situation in hand. I also am just stunned, Tucker, that you don't believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion are the root of a sound financial system. I mean, come on, where have you been for the last year, Tucker?
It's time for the kids to be quiet and let's get some real economists here who aren't just repeating Atlantic articles. This is insane.
It is absolutely insane. And the layers of insanity, I mean, I can't even believe the videos you showed about the people at SVB focused on the women's ski vacations and whatnot. It's just nonsense. And you're right. What we're facing right now is really serious. I mean, we are on the brink of a 2008-style financial crisis, and I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. In fact, you and I discussed this at length in our long-form interview several months ago. And at the time, the Fed hadn't even raised rates nearly as high as they have today. And I was saying, look, you don't raise rates in record fashion on an economy toting record leverage at maximum speculation and expect no consequence. I mean, this was clearly going to happen, and now we're seeing the weak links in the chain break. The areas where speculation was most rampant and most egregious are clearly coming down, and they're doing so, as they seem to do, in all the three-letter acronyms, just like they did in 2008. We're back to the three-letter acronyms, and there'll be a lot more of those. And frankly, I think this is the unintended consequence of the Fed's monetary policy layered with really bad fiscal policy on top of it. But essentially, they've been encouraging people to take reckless risks for years just because you had no alternative. You could get 0% sitting in a T-bill or having your money in the bank, or you could run out and you could speculate. And that's what they've done. And that's all coming back to bite them hard. And we've got some major consequences coming at us. And I think it's going to devolve very rapidly because of all the leverage that's been built up here.
That's exactly right. If you treated your children like Fed has treated Wall Street, your kids would all be in rehab. And what they've done is bad, no doubt.
Mark Henry, do you feel then that we are, or we could be anyway, on the verge of another crisis like 2008? It seems like things are all lining up to me.
I don't think it's hyperbole, Jan, to say that's going to be something like 2008. I don't even think it's hyperbole to say it's going to be worse.
Okay.
Because when you think about how the middle class is systematically being destroyed, and you think about how the 11 elements of the S&P 500, the index there, and how everything is being gobbled up by the government, these different industries and so forth. Think about everything being broken, everything from healthcare to finance, the banking system, not being able to make anything on your money if you're on a fixed income, and for so long CDs don't make any money and bonds don't make any money and so forth. And now the flip to the other side. And I was just actually out in California with some friends and talking about the housing situation there and looking for a house actually for my son. He just went on staff out there with the church. And the realization, it's multiple families in all of these houses. The middle class is being wiped out, and I think it's going to be actually worse.
Bill Koenig, your thoughts on this, please?
I agree with Mark. This is a very problematic period. We have, I understand, 50% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, tremendous amount of stress. Biden and his people were so anti-American production of oil and gas that has raised the price of crude oil to a very high rate that's helped spawn this massive inflation, which more and more people are having to go into their savings to make ends meet because of the cost of everything. As far as the digital currency, the central banks are determined and bent on putting that in place. You've covered it so well, Jan, in many of your programs. The other thing is this implementation of QR codes. I'm amazed at how fast that's happening. In Japan, it's a digital wallet. Everything is done with your iPhone or your cell phone. And I think that's where we're going right now. We're going to see the total diminish of the use of cash. And I know we're rapidly moving in that direction, but then QR codes are so convenient. I don't think by people using a digital currency or a QR code is the mark of the beast, but it's definitely going to move into that direction of the future mark, the implanted mark. To buy or sell, you have to have the mark. But this is definitely moving in that direction, the electronic form of financial transactions. And then we also have cryptocurrencies, another component to this. Federal Reserve wants control over everything, and I question their policies right now again. And once again, it's going to be the big New York and Wall Street firms that are going to make a killing on these higher interest rates, like we've seen with Chase, Citibank, and a few others here recently.
So, Mark, what is the Christian to do? Obviously, we can trust the Lord, but it's just something we should be doing beyond that.
Every day I'm asked, Jan, and I know you are too here at the Ministry, how do we handle this economic catastrophe, this tidal wave that's coming?
Right.
And in many ways, there's nothing we can do except prep. We need to prep our souls. We need to prep our assets as best as you possibly can. We need to think about security because as an economy is destroyed, lawlessness will increase. There will be greater threats. I'm encouraging men and women, you need to be thinking about those three things. How do I prepare my soul? It starts with the Lord Jesus Christ. Walk in godliness, draw near to God, never put your trust in assets or men, but always to grow in the grace and knowledge of the Lord Jesus. Think about your assets, manage them well. There's 2,200 verses in the Bible. Those have been applied in all sorts of different economies and all sorts of different time frames, and they're always sufficient. God will give us direction. And we also need to think about security on just a personal level because it's going to be more dangerous.
Your thoughts on this, Bill Koenig? How can the average listener who tends to get quite overwhelmed with these kinds of topics, the financial issue, how things seem to be falling apart, at least financially speaking. Your word of wisdom to some listeners right now?
I think the main thing is, number one, this is an opportunity for us to get closer and closer to our Lord Jesus Christ. Secondly, I think it's very important for us to be sensitive to our families and other people that are worried and concerned about the times we're living in. These are definitely peculiar times, but we're living in the times as Jesus spoke of in Matthew 24 in the Olivet Discourse, as in the days of Noah. I think we shouldn't be overwhelmed by that, even though at times it seems hard not to be, but I think no spirit of fear. That's a big concern today with Christians and people that can't process fear, worry. But I think at the same time, this is an opportunity, again, for people to have a personal relationship with Jesus like they've never, ever had before. Spend more time in the Word, listen to some good worship music, go to good churches like Mark's and others, and get fed, fellowship amongst brothers and sisters, and keep our eyes on the Lord, which will help us through these times, and at the same time, look with that blessed hope of Christ's return. Not sure when it's going to be. We certainly think it's going to be soon. But just remember God's plan for our lives, God's plan for our future, and get excited and expectant of His return.
Again, you want to sign up for Bill's e-newsletter, Koenig's Eye View from the White House. Do so at his website, watch.org. Mark, you had a comment?
Jan, just thinking about what Bill said there, that concept of fear. Satan always wants us to be afraid. And over, Jesus says, let not your heart be troubled.
Yep.
Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. I go to prepare a place for you. I will come again, receive you to myself. There's the rapture there. We're anticipating that. Or in 2 Timothy, God has not given us a spirit of timidity, but of power, love, and a sound mind. God's going to use all of our listeners, all of our friends who are following Jesus in the life of their family. So you draw near to the Lord, you find God's grace, God's strength, God's peace, God's joy in the midst of that, and it's going to have an impact on others. So seek the Lord.
Thank you for that. Let me ask you one more financial-based question. What does it mean to the average listener? Should the dollar stop being the reserve currency? That is in the process of happening. What might take the place of the dollar? The yuan, the ruble, what? What does it mean to the average listener? Mark?
I think Chinese currency is going to be the one that ends up coming into play, unless there ends up being some sort of agreement with the Chinese, because quite honestly, the Chinese are having more and more gobbling up the control on all sides, it seems.
That's right.
Some sort of digital currency, a global currency, or maybe there's going to be a couple of different digital ones. But as America loses that, we're going to see skyrocketing inflation because oil is traded in the U.S. dollar. But that is changing.
That's right.
And it's changing on all levels of trade as China is talking to Russia, as they're talking to Saudi Arabia, as they're down in other parts of the world. And we can look back and we can see great empires in the past who had the reserve currency of the world. For example, after the Napoleonic War, we had the British pound. And you can see what happened. There's going to be inflation. There's going to be hardship. There's going to be difficulty. But again, if you're a follower of Jesus, just remember this. These things may be out of our control. God is not surprised. He took care of Elijah during an economic collapse in their day because of sin. You can lean in on the Lord.
Again, folks, we hope that you'll either attend or tune in next Thursday, May 11th, 7 p.m. Central Time, for our Spring Understanding the Times event, and that would be at Revived Church, 7849 West Broadway, Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. Pastor Mark Henry has been in studio with me to talk about that. Watch it live, markhenryministries.com, the Mark Henry Ministries app, Olive Tree Ministries app. Watch it post-program on my website, Mark Henry Ministries website. Bill Koenig, I'm down to a couple minutes. I want to give that time to you. Anything you'd like to summarize, please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Jan. Great being with you and Mark today. I've talked to quite a few friends here in the last couple of weeks, and we all are just kind of what we just touched on, somewhat surprised at the times we live in. I don't think any one of us expected us to live in a day such as this. I mean, we can read prophecy, but to actually live it out, it's so unusual. But it is also an exciting time again. I'm very hopeful, expectant. I don't know when the Lord's coming back, but I have really personally felt a desire to spend much more time in the Word, much more time attending church, watching Christian TV. I just love praise and worship music. We just got to fill ourselves and feed ourselves with the joy of Jesus and the expectation of Jesus. And at the same time, keep praying for those lost ones in your family that you're so concerned about. We hear stories all the time. We've all had personal stories of people in our families that we've prayed for that have now have Jesus as their Lord and Savior. And I think God gave us 27% of the Bible to tell us what's going to happen prior to his return. And we certainly seem to be the generation that's going to see the Lord's return. So let's capture the moment for Jesus. That'll make a difference in our families, in our cities, our countries, and whoever God chooses to bring home with us, we have an influence of those folks as well for his purpose and glory.
Bill Koenig, thank you for all you do. Pastor Mark Henry, thank you for coming in today as well. Again, I'm going to just go out of the program here with a comment or two, because no matter what is going on in this world, no matter what evil ensues, we are told that we can have peace and calm in his presence. We've tried to emphasize that this hour. No matter who sits in government, we can have assurance in knowing God sits on the throne. No matter how dim things seem to be or how dark things get in this world, we can know with certainty in our hearts that the sun, S-O-N, still shines. In John 16:33, Jesus states, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world.